So here we are back at it, and on the top left here you see the background where we ended in the last chapter, and it feels pretty good to me. Obviously very rough, but we're going to try to put the car in there before we start blending any of the trees and stuff, as we know that this car is going to cover a lot of the stuff that goes on in here. On the right hand side we have the talent that I like the best. So many good pictures of her, but for some reason I felt this one there, which was more thoughtful in despair rather than something like this where she looks like she died. That's not the purpose of this. It's more an emotional crash than it is a, oh, she crashed and killed herself. So the reason for me having this select is really the car and the stuff that goes on around it. I love the smoke out of the door. I love the haze on top. All this stuff feels really, really good to me. So we're going to take this select of our talent and add that in here. And then the only thing really missing on this car select I have was some attitude or some flair around the light. So we're going to take this light here and we're going to add it right there. And then obviously we're going to start blending it into the background, and there's several steps to that, right? Now we prepared as much as we could in adding this grass or plants rather in here and also up here. So hopefully it will just be to sort of mask this in around. We photographed this with white behind these leaves here, but as I mentioned when we looked through capture 1, it's dark enough around here, so I think we can mask this out and try to place the door behind it so that we again insert the composite piece into the frame, allowing it to have depth to it. So there's a foreground element, our car becomes the middle ground, and it sits in there a lot better. When you do composite pieces, this is actually a quite valuable lesson. Often we just paste the composite piece right up front, as in, okay, here we have put something in. But if you manage to use something from the background that envelops that, or something that the composite piece can interact with, it's a lot better. Often when I shoot people, I allow them to put a leg on a rock or something else that inherently belong to the background plate. By having those two elements interacting and integrating, it always makes for a more believable composite. So with that, we're going to try to add these elements and put it all in there. So we're going to start with the car, and just going to rough it in there and then see where this takes us. So I'm going to close this out, and we're going to bring up our layer mask right here. Let me see. And bring up our layer palette right here. And you can hide your layers just by hitting tab. So they're gone, and here they show back up. So let me see. We're going to pull this underneath the contrast for sure. And we're just going to mask it out real quick. Again, coming down in here to add a layer mask, we use a lasso tool. We hold down the option key, which will allow us to give us anchor points like these. And obviously I want to keep some of this original smoke here. That's part of what we want to do. And I'm a little bummed out that I didn't shoot wider here, to be honest. Obviously I want to get as much detail that I can, but still I wish I had a little bit more of this haze and light here. So maybe we either fake that in Photoshop after by painting in some light, or we will try to maybe grab another frame that has more of this. So I'm going to keep these reflections here as well on the ground because they're pretty cool. And then we don't need any of this other stuff here. So we're going to come up here and around the door, keep some of these trees, and this will be our mask. We're going to invert this, and we're going to fill this with black. There, I filled it with white the first time around. And there's our car. Maybe I'll push it back over a tiny bit. Yeah, why not? Feels maybe a little big right there. Let's just start with that first. Now, if I'd shrunk this down, I probably would have shrunk these pieces down too, but now that this is at the original size, we could probably just drop this in and everything will fall on top of each other. So instead of resizing 3 times, I'm just going to bring these elements in here. So we're going to get our girl. And I thought now I would crop this out, but why don't we just take the whole thing? It's not going to change all that much. I'm going to put that in there, put that on an opacity so that we can try to line it up. Cool. Let's zoom into this a bit. And it's just about finding some points where they can line up right there. Perfect. And we're going to zoom out. And maybe we'll just take the light too while we're at it. And we're going to take that off. And there's our light. I'm going to add layer masks to all these as well. And let's just name them real quick. We're going to call this one for car, talent, and bright light. Just going to create a folder for these right away. Call this car and talent maybe. Cool. So here we are. So maybe we should just start with the light, get that in there roughly. And I'm going to turn that into opacity. And now we got 3 cars sitting on top of each other here, so it's a lot. So maybe we'll just turn that off. And I think we're just going to fill this whole area with black and just start painting it in a little bit. Take that up. And this is the area we wanted. So this frame is a little softer. The reason being probably is that I had my focus on the girl and it didn't hold the sharpness all the way up front. But I don't mind it. Smoke is a little hazy. We could give it a little sharpening just in case. We come in here, let me see, filter, sharpen, unsharp mask. And 50 looks fine. Just give it a little bit of something. And then we're going to keep erasing in this case to get a little bit more of what's going on underneath. Let me see, eraser, not my gradient. Oops. So now I erased onto my content layer, which is not good at all. We want to erase on the mask so we reveal rather than deleting. So again, coming into our mask, and then we can reveal some of the smoke from this. Not lining up quite here. So obviously this smoky layer and the other one underneath is taken at 2 different times here, but I think this is enough to, yeah, I think this would be fine. Perfect. And we might not have to use all of this either. And it feels a little brighter as well, so we're going to come in and we're going to do what we've done before, right? To blend pieces, come into our curves, and in this case we need to make it a little darker. Again, the density, the first element, density, contrast, and color. The 3 ways that we blend our pieces together. I'm going to move this over a bit. I'm going to do that again. That feels a little bit better. Yeah, you see I've taken these from slightly different perspectives, but I think we're close enough to be able to soft blend this in there. I'm going to take it down a little bit. I only moved the middle anchor point, but I'm going to move the top anchor point a bit too. Now that's starting to feel better. For sure. I'll take that up a tiny bit and we're going to call this for blend. Cool. And I think that's fine for now. I'm going to come in a little closer and we're going to look in the blend areas here to see if all this stuff lines up. And you see right in here, it's a little bit discrepancy, but I think, again, the detail here are so far into the picture, I don't think it will ever be viewable really to the naked eye. So maybe we'll just fix this one a little bit. So right in there where they line up a little better. Cool. And in this area, we're going to erase so we only have the car element from the smoky piece on top so we don't get any blur to that. Cool. Okay, mission accomplished for the first composite piece to the car. And then there's our talent. Put this at 100%. I like this sharper door, to be honest. There's a lot of smoke here. So we're going to see what we could do. Obviously, this is going to come in front, and then it might be fine. So we're going to play with that in a minute. We're going to fill our mask with black, so all that goes away. And then it's just to come in on the mask layer again, use our eraser, and just paint her in. So I've been giving a lot of compliments to this model, Anamika, but I really loved the way she embraced everything and how she embodied the mood for the shoot. So let me see. These shoulders here, they don't seem too far apart. A little bit. I'm going to come back down here. So the shoulder sits a little bit further out if I come back here. So it seems a little long in the elbow, but the haze that's in here is definitely better than having it all crisp right there. So maybe we'll just blend the two, right in here at least. Let me see. Does not look quite right though. So this is what we're going to do. To make this a perfect blend, the smoke, takes away a lot of contrast, like this. Now what's here is a density and contrast mismatch, really. It's happening by the fog or by the smoke, but we can, for a small area like this, at least get closer to it. Won't look quite like smoke and fog, but at least we can help the blend quite a bit. So I come in here and then Command-Shift-I as we exit our quick mask tool. And then here we can come into the curves. And again, it's a matter of raising the bottom to make things lighter. So we come in here. And now it's affecting all these areas. And I think what we need to do is to make sure that it only affects the talent layer. And that's a matter of just attaching these. And now we've seen that we managed to blend these pieces quite a bit better. It's bluer in here. It's a little color difference. So let me see if we add some yellow, maybe this blend will help even better. So we're going to push this down. Nice. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger and let this contrast that we created just bleed into the shoulder a tiny bit. Maybe I'll do the opposite. Sorry, I hit the wrong button there. All right, I think we did well. We blended those pieces in there quite beautifully. Let me see. Come right in here. Just make it a little better. Cool. All right, I think mission accomplished. Let's see. Just turning this on and off to see how it feels. And I feel there's areas in here that could help with a little bit of smoke and haze from the file underneath. So we're going to come to our brush and we're going to paint on top, taken away from this frame. So let's see. It's kind of nice. Cool. Beautiful. We could fine-tune this obviously, and I think her face is a little dark, so maybe while we're here we'll look at that. Just come in here, and again it's a matter of bringing the attention to where we want our eye to go. So we want the eye to go to the face for sure. Now it comes in here where we have high contrast and it comes less to her face. So we're going to come to her face. Again, the masking is the same process for me. We enter the quick mask tool, we paint on, we get this area, we invert that area by Command-Shift-I, and then we come in and we're just going to make a curve and bring that up. We're going to bring it up with some contrast. As we do this, the color shifts, and I mentioned this prior. To undo the color shift and only add contrast, we're going to come up here and we put this on luminosity. Now you see we take away some of that green. So let me do that again. If you're going to zoom in, and this is what we had with the contrast layer we're just creating, affecting color to, and we take away here, we blending changed it to luminosity, and when you see I go back and forth, we have a little warmer skin tones. So that feels a little bit better to me. Now, normally when I look at this close, for a fashion shoot, we might want to come in here and clean up underneath the eye and stuff, but that's so a part of this picture. So the emotional quality is perfect, I feel, and we're just going to leave this as is for now. All right, zooming out. So here we are, and now the process will be to get the car in there a little bit better. I mentioned the foreground elements and the car sitting into the background, so I think maybe we should start there. We're going to mask the car out on this layer. On this mask, we're going to create the stuff that's going to be in front so that we can move the car freely behind it. So why don't we just start there? I'm going to turn off the car layer for a minute. And then we're just going to select these plants here that sits in front. Could have done this two ways, right? Could have come and selected the files that are photographed with the whiteboard behind. It would have been quite easy, but I don't think this is too hard anyway, and we're going to blend it in there. So why don't I just start by using these pieces and see how that works, and then maybe afterwards, if you don't feel like it's good enough, we could find those plates with the white behind. So I shot with the white behind with the intention of making the composite easier, but I do think this will be quite fine. It's a little messy in here, but I think I want to just take away a lot of this and just use those bigger leaves up front. So let's get that process started. Zoom in. And several ways to do this, right? We could do it by hand, as I'm starting now. We could go into our color range and we could do some of that work. But, you know, these leaves are pretty big. I'm just going to start this process here. And as I do this, it's really just a matter of holding down the Option key to give me this anchor point and moving around. This is not going to be perfect, but again, we haven't really quite placed the car, so this will be a process of just getting the car in there. So I have a really soft brush here, I could tell, because there's parts here of several layers showing up. So I'm just going to try to mask as well as I can on this layer, and then obviously we got to redo the masks or whatever else that's blending into this. Cool. So now that we made the selection, I'm going to come in and fill this with black. There. I'm going to do it twice, like that. And then we're going to mix this up a little bit. Let me just see. We're going to hide it. We're going to hit backward slash, and this is what we have so far for our selection. So we're going to fine tune. I'm going to take away these areas as well. So we're going to come into our selection and then just maybe use the magic wand here for a minute. In order to get this done though, I got to come down into, let me see, this layer here. Now we could use it. Here. So I'm going to take this down to 11. As you see here, I've been selecting too many colors. So we're going to undo this, Command deselect, and then just going to come in and be a little bit more, hopefully, selective with the pixels that the computer selects for us. Cool. So we're going to come in here and we're going to feather this, and I think 1 pixel sound okay. We're going to let me see. I thought I would hide this, but there's a few things here that we definitely want to take away. This part here, and there's a few things we can just take off, which is in here. Cool. So let's see. I'm going to turn this on. And now that we see that the car is starting to show up behind here, and so we're going to come in here, select this mask, and we selected these areas between the leaves. We can hide this, and then just, let me see. Oh, I'm going to do it the other way. We don't want to hide it, we actually want to expose it, because we're doing this on the car. So now we want to expose the car, so we want to erase this mask. And then we see the car start showing up underneath here. Cool. So again, we're just going to rough it in for now. Yeah, we got to go through all these different parts and pieces here to make this beautiful. So starting to see that this is starting to come behind. Let me see. This in here we don't need to see. So Command D, which means deselecting the area we had, and we don't want to paint this in. All right, not bad. I'm going to continue doing this. See this area definitely, maybe some in here, maybe some in here. Cool. Again, as I fill these masks, I don't fill it once or twice, and this time I did it 3 times. I feathered this by 1 pixel, and you know then you get a soft edge that gradually bleeds or feathers outwards. So when I fill this, it will, into these pixels that's feathered, just push in a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more for every time you fill it. Now that will create a crisper edge every time. So I'm just kind of looking at what my edges feel like. This time maybe the feather on 1 was too much, so I added more fill, and you know, it feels pretty good the way it is now. What does not feel so good is that the car feels brighter back here, and it truly should feel a little darker. You know that when we lit the car, I talked about creating a highlight here, but I put this back end of the car towards the wall where the light, the skylight above, didn't quite hit it, because I wanted it to fall off as if this was in the shadow more. Obviously it's not enough, so we got to create another shadow in the computer that will simulate the shadow that these trees will cast. And that's really just, again, using curves. Let me see, I'm gonna get out of this here. I'm gonna hit Command D and undo our mask. Then we're gonna come in here again, and we're just gonna create a soft, large brush as if this was in a darker area, like that. And we're gonna Command Shift I this area, and then put this on top in the car talent folder. Curves, and you're gonna pull this down. Even more maybe, there. All right, so I'm looking at different areas here. I'm looking at this area, and I'm looking at this area. This area feels pretty good. It's darker, and it should be darker as these plants are pretty close. Up here it was too much. So we're going to come into this layer. We're going to undo some of the stuff we did there, so it becomes a little brighter up here. So now by undoing, I'm just painting on black, masking out what this is doing. Add a 30% opacity, and I just come in here and do less of that light. And then we come to our eraser, and maybe we could do more of that darkening down in here. A little too much. Undo that, Command Z, 20% opacity by hitting the 2, and then I can just brush in a little bit more darkness in here. Maybe on the wheels too a little bit. So as I paint around here to create these shadows, I realized maybe the whole car should be a little darker. I'm going to look at that because obviously there's some discrepancies here, both in color and in contrast a bit. So the car feels more yellow. This feels bluer in the background. So again, to blend these pieces, either we got to consider making the background a little bit yellower or the car cooler. And to be honest, maybe it's a little bit of both. This feels really purple in here. So maybe we should try that. We're going to call this for tree shadow. And then we're going to come in here for a color. And we're going to go down to blue and add a little coolness. As you see, I'm affecting overall here now, which I shouldn't. So we're going to come to our car talent folder, put this on normal, there. And now our blue layer will only affect the car. There. Feels a little bit better already. And now you're going to come in and I'm going to add some yellow to the layer underneath. I'm going to call this color. So obviously we could have pushed this with a little magenta and more blue to fit the tones we see in the rocks here, but I don't want to push this too far off the original. So we're going to modify the car to fit, and we're going to modify the background to fit. So let me see, we're going to create some layers here. We're going to do this, or create some folders. I mean, we're going to call this for fence. This one, maybe we call it for forest path, as in the path, opening it up so that the car would have a place to come down. And now we see all the stuff I was looking at in here doesn't even matter. We don't see any of it. And as we don't see much of that, maybe we could open this up here. Yeah, like this. You see, just by doing that, it's kind of rough and funky with big brushes, but these trees are pretty forgiving with the masking. So we can maybe come in here and clean this up, but I feel a lot better about that right away. Now, some of these you see in here, We talked about this bleeding of other files in here. So we want to make sure that we take that away from this area. Put this on 0, and you see right in here that there's some residues. We want to just make sure that we don't see that through the leaves and through the car. And as I did this, we also see that we want to open that up. Really crude for now, but we're going to mask. But we're going to fine tune that as we go along. Pretty cool. So we're going to come back up to our car. Well, before I do that, I wanted to add some yellow, but it was so messy here. So I'm going to come above all these so that we give color to all these layers. That creates the background. And we're going to come into the blue, and then we're going to pull this down a bit. Nice. Now we're giving the background a little bit more yellow. We're giving the car a little bit more blue, and they seem to be a little bit better in there. All right, so before we start fine-tuning the color mismatches between the two, we talked about this early on in the introduction. It's the layer that even out the colors, and this is our color fill. So we're going to come in here, we're going to do solid color, and then we're going to pick, in this case, maybe a tone that sits in the deeper values, in the blues and greens, and we can just see what this will feel like. So I'm just adding on the color that we already have inherent in the frame so that we could sort of blend the highlights a little bit together. So we're going to try this color. And it's easy to change that afterwards by just hitting the color picker here. And you're going to put this onto color. And obviously this is way too much of this one tone, but then you're going to pull this slider back. What these layers do is to apply color overall, but it does it when you put it on color in a way that affects the color, not the contrast. And by this, we blend the layers in an intangible way that's really quite beautiful. It also does it in areas where we don't want it. Now we're adding green to the red, and we want to create that color contrast. This is the only red piece we have in here, pretty much. So you don't want to have it everywhere, but you see these pieces here, how much they sort of start blending in together. Car feels too bright overall. So I did add the shadow on the sides, but we're going to give it a little bit of overall density. Again, coming into the curves, which truly are our friend. I just push the car darker, maybe right in there. I also feel this is too bright now that I get the car in there. Maybe the whole picture should be deeper. So before I make the whole picture deeper, let me just focus on these areas. And I know my mind wanders a bit now. We are going to mask this car out better. But in order to mask things well, the piece has got to massage itself better together too. It's hard to just fit something in there when there's a discrepancy in color and tone. At least for me there is. I always try to find a way to sort of overall and holistically massage the pieces slowly together. As I add the pieces, the color, the shapes, all that stuff starts blending together as well. So now I realize I look at these pieces here a lot, more than I want. So again, we're going to create our brush, and then we're going to come into our quick mask tool, and a really big one. This area is too bright for me. These rocks here are too bright for me. This is too bright. This is too bright. So I'm going to start there. Maybe this up here is a little bit too bright too, but not as much. So you're going to come to 20%. I just hit my 2, and we're going to paint a little bit up here like that. And then exit our quick mask, Command-Shift-I, and I'm going to do another curve. I'm going to pull this down. As I created that curve, it ended up inside the car talent folder, which is not going to do us any good. What we want to do is to put this below the car. So we're going to come down in here and pull it out of the folder, and now it affects the background. And again, the intention with doing great retouching is really to make the eye go from one place to another and go to the places that we have set our story. So just this little move made a great difference to me in this picture. Here, I look in here, I look in here, I look all other places, but as I turn this on, my eye starts going to the light, start going to her, and it feels a lot better right away. One thing I could do maybe with these rocks here, I'm just gonna try to maybe reduce them in size, or at least push them down a little bit. Now they feel like they're very present in the picture. And yes, I liked it as a landscape, but now that we get our composite image in there, feels a little bit too much. So this is our left side river. Just want to open it up to make sure all these layers are connected. And then maybe I'll just push it down. With these elements, it's also about creating lines in the photograph. We talked about this in composition. So if I have something here that starts in a corner and leads in and ties up with the line of the light, and I talked about this, either we got to find a light piece where I capture all of this, or I'll paint this in so it extends out. This line here comes to the corner and it's always effective to create these lines into the corner, and then here down along the leg, and then we have this piece. So there's something here going on that starts shape up to a triangle. Maybe I'll pull this even further down, let's see. So that this rock here becomes a part of this bottom line that could help create a triangle. So up there, here. Let's split the difference. How about right in there? Cool. I have a little bit of a darkness here, which I'm not quite sure where it's coming from. Let's see. Oops, I double clicked instead of opening it up. There's this really dense part right there around this rock, which I don't know where it's coming from. I'll just turn off all these up here now. I'm going to call this for contrast. So I'm walking up this layer to try to find, here it is. I guess I wanted to tone down these rocks here, but it's way too hard. So it doesn't blend in the water. So I'm going to take away that piece. I loved it for all the stuff that goes on up there, but not this. Now, this rock fits better in the water. If I want to tone this rock down, I got to be way more deliberate in selecting it rather than what I just did, which was, a big sloppy blob. So the sloppy blobs definitely work for this area, but absolutely not for this area. So if you want to take down that rock, I might do that in a minute, because it is getting a lot of attention. And again, the purpose of this is to take attention away from the pieces we don't want the eye to go to and to the pieces we want the eye to go to. So with all that talk about this rock, I'm going to just get that done. So there's two ways to select this rock. We could select the rock, or we can select the areas around it. And I think in this case, it's easier to select what's around it. It's more uniform in tone. And let me see. I'm going to come in and fine tune this. Let's see if I'm going to include some of these areas around here. Let's see. Not so good. Cool. We're going to feather it. Do 1 pixel. And we're going to invert this, because now we selected the stuff around. And what we do want to make sure to happen is to make the rock darker. So we're going to go Command-Shift-I. We're going to go 0. And then, let me see. Two things can happen now. All this sloppiness around here, we don't want to bother with. We only want to work on this. So instead of creating a curve from here, which is going to start or give us a mask already on the curve, we're actually going to come up here. We're going to come Layer. Actually going to come up here to Layer. We're going to go New Adjustment Layer and Curves. And we're going to call it Curve 7. Oh, darn it. It did it anyway. Right, then we're going to come into our curves, and we're going to make our curve with the selection. I'm going to pull this, a feather. Then we need to invert our selection, and then we're going to come and create a mask, and I'm going to pull this down. And now you see we pulled down the rock here, but if I do this, you see how crazy all the other stuff around is. So what we want to make sure then is to just come in here, create a simple mask around it, we invert that, and we're going to fill everything like that. And now we know the only area this mask affects is the rock that we have sitting there. So I'm going to do this, and now we see we have toned that rock down quite beautifully. I'm going to zoom into it a little bit. There's some crisper edges around here, so we're going to let that just sort of bleed a little bit. So we're going to come in with a soft brush at 10% and just brush around it. This is just going to soften the edges around our selection. I'll do a little bit more maybe here. Cool. Mission accomplished. We have toned down the rock so it gets less attention. Beautiful. All right, so we're going to start working on the smoke around here and sort of bleed this in. We're going to mask some of this out to make sure that the car even sits better into our frame. So I'm going to call this for rock density, and you're going to call this forest density, just so we know what we're doing. I'm going to come into our car talent folder, and now you know this mask here is only, oops, I'm going to select it. The mask here is only for this area to make the car door sit behind. Still is too bright in here, so we're going to work on that as well. And this mask down here is for the actual car. So this is what we're going to work on right now. I love this here, and I think we can maybe put these reflections here on a separate layer afterwards and just multiply them or do something that this sparkle, the reflection from the headlights, will sit into our water. So we're going to do that too, but for now I'm going to just leave them as they are. Cool. All right, let's start masking this out. First we're going to erase here just to make sure that we have everything. All right, so we see there's a little cut into the dress, and I started erasing, but it's not the mask here, it's actually the mask up here. So I want to make sure that this doesn't affect this part right here. And then come back down into our car, and then we're going to cut this out. So I see a little bit of the dress up in here, which I didn't see earlier, so maybe we got to just follow this line here. Cool. I think maybe the magic wand would be just as good in here, so I'm just gonna cool. I'm gonna feather it by 1 pixel and then hit return. And I'm gonna, let me see, before I hide it, I'm gonna just include more of the ankle here. Fun. All right, so I'm gonna hide it, and I think you gotta feather it here. Let me see. Now I can't remember if I feathered it or not, so I'm gonna come back up, and I did feather it. The lasso tool already has a feather built in, so we don't have to do that again then. So we're gonna come in with a brush, and then just paint around. Cool. Well done, fun. You're gonna deselect that and come in and just take a look at what's going on. So obviously this now feels really floating, and in some ways it felt better when it was darker behind there. And that means that this car would cast a deep shadow underneath, and we gotta apply that deeper shadow to the background as well underneath, right? So we're gonna again select our quick mask tool, and we're gonna just paint in like that, maybe a little higher and a little bit right in there. And this would be the soft area where the car will cast a deep shadow underneath it and onto the background plate. So we're gonna come up here and we're gonna go curves. I'm gonna push this down quite a bit. There. Now we don't want it on the plants. We only want it underneath the car. So to avoid that, we're going to come up to our car talent mask, and we're going to select this. And then on this, we're going to invert it. Let's see, and hide it. And then on this mask that we just did, we're going to brush out, so that now our darkening layer underneath does not affect these leaves up here. Now this mask is not perfect, so in doing this, I got to remember to come back in and fine tune not only the mask around, but also this curve mask that we did. Feels a lot better. I'm going to hit Command D, and I'm just going to take away right there. So this is our car shadow. Cool. Maybe we need to expand this car shadow mask. Maybe right, oops, a little bit too much. 50%. Come down in here more. Nice. Way better. Again, selecting our brush, quick mask. I feel like this car door is just too bright. It sits too close to these plants and trees to be this bright. So we select, we exit our quick mask, Command Shift I, and then we're going to come into the car talent folder, and we're going to come right in here with our curves, and we've already done this once, but the other one we did affected a lot of the other areas, so this one should only affect the door. Push this down, call this door shadow. Call this contrast. I'm going to just name some of these. I'm going to call this number 2 here for, let me see, shoulder blend. Could have called it smoke blend, but I know where that is now. And this would be our face contrast. Cool. I have to say so far, just to look at these layers that we have. Again, my approach to Photoshop is really quite simple. We shoot for a composite, and then we use Photoshop to extend that vision. The few tools that I use is really color, contrast, and use saturation a lot of the time. The fourth one is the color fill. And as I mentioned in the introduction to my tools, I apply this to almost every layer that I do. And you see now that this process is starting to unfold. Where in the car talent folder, we got the color, we got the contrast, we got dodging, we got burning to highlight and darken the areas that we want. We bring in a highlight to the face because we want that to stand out. We're adding darkness to these areas here because we want to push those down. And it's really in this massaging that the art of Photoshop, or the art of retouching and blending elements, really comes to life. It's seeing what the differences are and using your eye to make sure that you mesh the two beautifully together. So we're going to continue massaging this a little bit longer. The big one now is obviously the smoke here, and then we're going to bring in some pieces of the smoke we shot in the trees to extend the haze we have around the car into the trees. So I'm going to come into our car mask and just really, really soft. See if we could just create a little opacity so that the trees behind starts, just coming through the haze that we have for the car. And as we start doing this feels pretty good. Now it feels like we have this halo of smoke around the car. So obviously this doesn't, it feels good in the blend, but it doesn't look good when we have this just halo effect of smoke. So we obviously got to extend this upward somehow. As you saw me fuss with the shoulder right in here, where we just in a small area made it brighter to match the smoke, we could do that as well in here. Just brighten it up to match the smoke. So that's one way to do it. The other is obviously to add the smoke that we shot on location. So it might just be a mixture of the two. So I'm going to continue in our mask here on the car. We're going to do 0 so that we have 100% masking out, and then just come back down and take some of this stuff out. Cool. So we're going to take a look at these windows here, which don't look that great without seeing through them. We have this black mask behind it. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to use our car talent mask up here, which is obviously affecting the leaves. And we're going to use the same up here. Hang on, I'm not going to do that. What happens is, now that we have a mask on just the leaves, I'm going to show you real quick. It will allow me to take the car, all these areas here, and just move it around behind because we already masked it out. So that's a big benefit. If I start adding the mask of the windows to this, it will not allow me to move it as freely as this afterwards. So I thought I would, but we're not. The reason for me thinking to put it on a different layer is that we're going to do this at an opacity, but we're going to fix that in here anyway. So first thing we're going to do is just to select this area. And then we can just subtly come in here. I'm going to open that up again at 10% maybe. Big brush and just brush through just a tiny bit. And I think that's pretty nice. I'm going to hide that, and we're going to do so to the other two windows as well. I'm going to deselect, come in for this area, and just use this right here. I'm going to hide it, select our brush. Nice. This back window doesn't feel that bad actually because it has some more haze going on there, but I'm going to do this there as well, just tiny bit. Hide it, and then there. Cool. So now we created sort of a see-through through the glass there, and we see a little bit better what's going on, and the car also feels a little bit better sitting in there. Now the roof here feels too bright, too much of a highlight. So we're going to come into our door shadow. We can just use that, I think, and just brush into it. 0, and just make that darker. Let's see, it doesn't seem like it's opening up for me. We got to deselect maybe. There we go. I had the window back here selected, so that's why it did not want to make the top darker. There. Cool. Alright, we're going to continue masking the car out. Some edges here obviously will be crisper, others will be sharper, and others will be completely soft. So we're going to come into our wheel, and this will be some of the sharper ones for sure. And here's another mask here that doesn't look good. Oops. So now I'm on the shadow layer, which we don't want to fill. Come into our car and mask those out. Take this area here and just lump this off for now. Cool. Again, you see the shadow we created under the car definitely needs to be sitting in here as well to be able to match the two pieces. This is the original shadow, the deepness that we have underneath, and that's a great reference for us. So we're going to come to our car shadow and use this reference and just blend into it. Hit 0. Let me know that this really would be the depth of this shadow that sits underneath the car. I'm going to just bleed it out a bit, to be honest. Cool. And then we're going to come into this and maybe soften this a little bit. Oops. I'm going to come back a couple of steps. I'm going to use this here and then soften it. There. So now we're erasing softly on the car layer and reveal the water underneath it. And then I'm doing the opposite again, bringing the car shadow back using the eraser. And it's just a matter of blending the two. And that is feeling quite good to me, to be honest. This feels a little heavy on the car layer. Brush on the mask, soft, and we're just going to see more of the rock behind it. I have some fingerprints and stuff here, but I don't really mind those. What we do mind though is the area behind here. We need to make this more see-through so we see through the smoke and not onto black. So we're going to come in like this. We're going to do the same here as we did on the windows. So we're going to hide this. We're going to have our brush on about 10% and just let this see through here a tiny bit. Cool. Here I have a hard edge. We haven't blended our background layers quite well enough. Obviously we didn't even do that at all because I wanted to put the car in there. But now it starts to, you know, sit in there quite a bit, and it's time to start looking at these masks here, because as I start blending this in and having one piece transition into another like I do with soft brushes, I need to know what's going on behind. Let me see, I'm going to just use my selection tool here. As we have these traveling into the background, this can't just stop. It just got to travel into it, right, somehow. So either we got to mask this out to take away some of these straws here, or we got to blend it. And to blend it, when you have a discrepancy in the background plates like this, we're not going to be able to do a good job. So I'm going to just come back down. And as I'm looking at this, it's starting to feel pretty darn good. I do think we need to push everything back. I think the car, as I mentioned earlier, might be a little bit big. So why don't we just take a look at that, making the car maybe a tiny bit smaller. So we're going to come into our car folder. Now, since we masked this out, remember, we're not going to select the whole folder. We're only going to select what's inside the folder, and that will allow us to move things around. Outside this folder, there's this car shadow layer, and we sure want to make select that with us, so that when we move, we also move the shadow with us. I'm going to push that back a tiny bit. Maybe right in there. Huh. Yeah, definitely feels more like it's more in there when it's smaller. Cool. All right. So in looking at this gets a lot of attention. So maybe we're going to try to do something about that, either by darkening it or maybe finding another piece that softens this up. This doesn't quite sit in there yet, so we got to make sure that we maybe get some water on the wheel, something, maybe push it even further back and even smaller. I think overall, feel a little bit too bright. So I'm going to start by only adjusting the background and see if there's anything we could do to just tone down the stuff behind. I named this contrast. I actually see that's wrong. It's actually our slightly yellow layer, so it's a color layer. And underneath color, we're going to come in and do a contrast move, affecting all the background plates that we have. Just try to push this down. I like that better already. This allowed me to just look at the car more. The car pops a little bit better. So let's just turn this on and off. And it feels better for sure. I'm gonna call this contrast. Cool. This tire here, or the hubcap, it's a little too bright for me. It feels too lit. So we're gonna come in and do our elliptical marquee tool. Let's see if we could select this here pretty well. And then we're going to come to our select, and we're going to transform selection. I'm just going to see if we can. I mean, there's so many different ways to select stuff, right? But I just wanted to use something different that might be easier and better. What this does is to allow me a really smooth circle, right? Which is tougher to do with my favorite tool, the lasso tool. So this would be a place where using paths would be maybe the easier way, but I don't use paths that often. So I think this would work out well, and then we can fine tune it a little bit in a minute. Into our car talent folder, we can take these two here and put them on top. I like to have the contrast and color underneath, and we have these adjustment layers above. So we're going to come in and curves, Command Shift I, and we're just going to tone down the hubcap look a little bit. There. I'm going to call this for hubcap. All right, I'm going to zoom out, and I'm going to save this so that we know that we have saved our efforts. And this is where it stands, and it's starting to feel pretty good. I think at this stage, I want to take a quick little break, and we have massaged the pieces somewhat in there, and the finishing touches to this will be cleaning everything up and getting this whole holistic thing massaged in there better. The steps are obviously to get the car to bleed and blend better. There's two steps to that. There's masking it better, getting these elements to interact. So I'm going to see if we can find a little bit of water's edge that we could put along right here, so it feels like the tire's not floating on top, it's sitting in it. There will be reflections in the water. The car doesn't have any reflections now, which we definitely need. Then there need to be some smoke that floats above it. We have some elements for that. And then we want to just take away some of these rocks, just too many of them at the moment. And then we're going to blend the background plate properly, and I think that will sort of make everything feel better. That will make everything sit there. So a quick little break. We have, in this session, we added the car in there. We added a new face to the girl. We added a little bit more smoke to this, and we kind of put our elements for the car. We found a placement for it. We pushed it in there, and this is just part of the process. Massaging, looking, feeling, using color, contrast, use saturation, density to blend the pieces in there. And as I say this, I wonder if we should take down the use saturation a tiny bit on the car. And what happens, if we do use saturation with this color fill layer on top, the more effective, the less color it is in this, the more effective this color layer will be. And I think that will help this blend together a tiny bit. So we're going to come in here, and we're going to come use saturation. There. Now, two ways to use saturation. We could put it on top, which will be taking color out overall, or take color out and then add color on top. So it's a little bit of a difference between the order of things here, between use saturation and color. So I just want to toggle here. I'm going to Command C. This is use saturation above. This is use saturation underneath. And you can see that there's a subtle difference where you see more blue here with the color on top. I think I like the more blue. So there. All right, I'm just reassessing what's here. I'm gonna do a little bit more of that reassessing on my own, and then we're gonna come back and with intention blend these background layers together, get the composite element in there, sort out a little bit on the left-hand side where the rocks are too heavy, and then we're gonna take this picture to finish. So I'll see you in a minute.